Talked about your team you brought on and who you're
Oh yeah, they are amazing.
you
We
coming
did have a
on,
really
but
nice.
no, it was really good.
Yeah, we had a nice interview with the the surveyor. But what's even better is we are very, very lucky to have an amazing team.
Right.
There we go?
Yeah.
Yep. Alright, let me just switch glasses because I can't see the screen with my other ones. Alright, great. Alright, so welcome to the March 28th meeting of the Town of Berthoud Board of Adjustments. Everyone keep me honest, please. So we call the meeting to order at about 6:01. So it's our tradition to start our hearings with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Ms. Rieger, at this time will you please take the roll for the Board of Adjustments?
Chairperson Anderson. Vice Chair Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Donnelly.
Here.
Commissioner Hoffmans.
Here.
Commissioner Semadalis.
Here.
Commissioner Wing.
Great, thank
Thanks
you.
for the pizza.
Thanks, Terry.
Okay. So do we have anyone on Zoom with us tonight? Not yet. Great. All right. I'm Karen Anderson. I'm the current chair of the Board of Adjustments. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight and our audience. Copies of the agenda should be on the table in the front. The members of the Board of Adjustments are volunteers. Our duty is to review the application materials supplied by staff and the applicant, hear public testimony, hear from the applicant, and then discuss matters before us as they comply with the land use code review procedures. We have staff in attendance tonight to both provide us with presentations of the agenda items and answer our questions. Tonight we have one item to be heard. For that first item on the agenda, there will be a public hearing to consider a request to allow more square footage for signage at the property located at 135 Grand Market Avenue, Resolution 2024-5. With that, I would ask staff to please present the application materials. Not until the next, because we don't have minutes of the Board of Adjustments.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So Madam Chair and members of the Board of Adjustment, thank you. This evening we are hearing a request for a larger directional sign than what is allowed by code for the Bank of Colorado. And we are having some technical difficulties, so you're just going to have to imagine that you are seeing the slides in front of you. Just like the land use planning process, a a waiver or a variance request is exactly the same. There's a pre-application meeting that we hold, then there's an application submittal phase. Tonight we're in the public meeting phase, and then the fourth phase are post-approval actions. So tonight, during the public meeting phase, staff will give a presentation. The applicant, Mr. Cody Fulmer, is here, and he is the branch president, correct? Regional president, yep, so even bigger than branch president. He will be here and he will give a presentation on the request. It could be a very brief presentation. And then there will be public hearing, so anybody that's in the audience that wants to speak about or ask questions is welcome to do so. And then the public testimony will be closed, and then you all will have discussion and then vote. So this is located south of Grand Market Avenue on the west side of North Berthoud Parkway and north of Highway 287. It is just west of and adjacent to Starbucks, if you know where that is. All right. And this is a commercial center with multiple tenants. And one of the tenants in this center is the bank. They have an ATM facility or an ITM facility that's located just north of their bank, their main office there. Then it has a drive-through, and one of the items that they would like to have at that bank is a sign, of course, that indicates that it's there. In your packets, you had to locate where it's located. You have some there's SketchUps for the actual sign itself. In our code, it states that a directional sign cannot be greater than 6 square feet in size. And directional signs 6 square feet in size are also exempt from needing a permit. Our code is silent on directional signs larger than 6 square feet. So therefore, if our code is silent on something, that means it's prohibited. So the size of it's almost like a component of the canopy that will go over the ATM, ITM. And it is gonna provide some shade, some wind, some snow and rain, shelter a little bit for those that are driving through there. And they're between the two posts that go over this unit, they're wanting just to have Bank of Colorado ATM, ITM located there. The sign itself will not be illuminated. It will from within, they're following the new sign code, so the lights will be from above and they'll shine right on down. So in meeting with variances in a lot of communities are frowned upon because they are going from what is deemed as the vision for the community, and you don't want to make a habit of continuing the same type of variance, and when you do, then it's time to make some changes in the code. This is a unique situation because it's almost like a structure that's going around the ATM unit and they need to have some kind of sign that says this is what it is. So in your packets, there are review criteria, and since we can't have it on the slide, I am gonna read them a little. I'm not gonna read them verbatim, but I am gonna go over them in case anybody's listening on Zoom. So that when the relief is granted, there's not going to be a negative impact to the neighborhood or the public good. And staff found that, yes, this is true. That by granting this, we're not damaging the neighborhood or the public good. That there are exceptional circumstances applying to the piece of property which don't generally apply to the remaining property in the same zoning area or neighborhood, and that is true because of the sign size. That the requested variance shall not authorize any permanent use not permitted in the zone district. Signs are permitted in the commercial zone district. And directional signs are, this just happens to be a little bit larger. Then is the hardship in whole or in part self-inflicted, or in circumstances where the property owners affected, such as neighbors, concur in writing that the variance shall be, is okay. And surrounding property owners were notified of the hearing, and the applicant also did reach out to surrounding property owners. I did have one property owner in the most western residential structure contact me, and that individual said as long as the sign itself wasn't illuminated, that they didn't have any issues with the
In the
request.
townhouses, is that who contacted you?
Mhm. Yep, so there is a findings and recommendation in your packet, and there are just 3 development standards. One is that this is in the code that if they don't enact the variance within 6 months, then the request is negated. That the plans contained in the application are limited to what is being presented tonight, and if those plans change, they would need to come back. And that all standards of the sign code shall be adhered to at all times, which we have done a preliminary review, and other than the size, they're good to go. So that concludes staff's presentation, and again, there are sample motions in your packets. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Any questions, commissioners, at this point? I have one question, excuse me, I'm still munching. this variance were to be granted, would it be something that would be recorded and run with this particular property?
So if the variance is granted for this particular ATM canopy, we're saying that yes, that's okay, but if the copy would ever need to be changed, it would be a granted nonconformity, so to speak. So let's say that it changed from Bank of Colorado to Wells Fargo. If Wells Fargo wanted to come in, they would have to comply with their sign. But as long as Bank of Colorado is there and they're changing copy, then they can have that 27 square feet.
Alright, but if someone else came in, they would have to conform as well.
Yep, and it could be just as simple as it could still be a black panel and then they just reduce the words to be 6 square feet.
So it's 27 square feet now?
Yeah, what's the panel that's on the inside between the two posts is being proposed to be 27 square
So
feet.
like 5 by 6, something like
Yeah, 3 by 7, I think,
that.
yeah. Yep, and again, the lights will shine down, it's not going to be internally illuminated.
Okay, so the question I had was, I know we don't have anything in the sign code. I'm assuming at some point there'll be more banks maybe that want to do this. Would we just keep going through this process, or would we change our code to maybe address this?
Yeah, that's a great question. We don't have this sign, we don't have anything in the code that fits what this sign is. Because is it really a directional sign? It's not saying go this way. It's what we felt as if it fit the most. It's not a monument sign. So what really fits? It's definitely something we'll need to consider if we get another bank that's going to have a ATM and they want a sign. It's something that should be caught during the site plan development process or the special use permit process. And if it is caught, then they would have to come before you again for that unless we change the code. And this one happened to be something that when the overall building did their overall sign plan, they didn't include this in that. And so it would have been noted then, and we might have been able to do something during the development review phase, but it wasn't noted then.
In the sign code, what's the maximum size for other signs in the town of Berkeley?
So that's a great question, and there's lots of different sizes. It depends on what type of sign. Do you know off the top of your head? Terry's our sign master.
It depends if you're doing a wall sign or a blade sign. So it varies on the size of the building.
Or a monument sign,
Or
yeah,
a
a lot of
monument
signs
sign.
depend on the frontage of the building on the street, and then there's a percentage. But this sign, compared and with all the other signs, does not exceed their
No.
frontage requirements. So they're under the sign allowance for size that they would need for the whole building.
We're talking about just one sign.
Just one sign over the ATM. So they're wanting 19 more square feet to go from 6 to 27.
Could you, looking at the picture, the bank is here, right, with Starbucks next to it. The ATM's out here at the end of the parking lot.
Yeah.
Which side is it? I consider that north and south, but is the side on the other side from the bank of the ATM, or is it on the side facing the bank of the
I believe
ATM?
it's going to be a double facing sign.
Correct.
So it's like, is it above the ATM then, where it would be visible from both sides?
Yeah, so you'll be able to see it from the backside.
Yep.
Kind of, you think of the canopy, but it won't be illuminated, but it will have Bank of Colorado on the south side and the north side of the canopy.
That's the back, that's the front.
Got it.
We'll ask Cody to introduce himself for the record.
Yeah. I'm Cody Fulmer, Bank of Colorado Regional President, and it's really, it is signage, obviously, we want people to know that it's there, but it's also, it's really a canopy to cover the ATM for weather, safety, down lighting so that people can see when they're doing their transactions.
And I'm assuming you're gonna have some type of signage, like enter and exit.
Well, we already have that on the asphalt, so it's just painted.
The machine is physically not standing today, is it?
Yes.
It is.
Oh, it is, okay.
Yeah, it's there.
And the machine is facing north, correct?
It's facing north, so you're gonna get your cash on the north side of the ATM. It's really, there's a lot of things it needs to have, it's there, but if you would pull up at night, it's gonna be dark, security, lighting, down lighting, so you can see you're doing your transaction. Weather, snowing, raining, and it's, I get it, I mean, the code, I think you really don't have a canopy code, and this is probably something that would fall under, no. I mean, to me, it's a canopy, it's not really a sign, but
Yeah.
but because it has signage on it, obviously, it hits that area. And Ann's done a nice job of making sure we're in that, getting compliant, so.
We're just trying to figure out how to make it fit. And this was the path that would make it fit.
Yeah, we were gonna have it at the, in the there is one drive-through, we were gonna have the drive-through window, and then attached to the building was gonna be a punch-through that would have the ATM. Doesn't work very well if somebody would be pulling up to get an ATM transaction and somebody's behind trying to get out of the drive-through because their transaction is done. So then we moved it to the north part of the parking lot, which, and did a nice job of saying ITM. It is an ITM, and ITM is an interactive teller machine, so during banking hours or past our banking hours, you can get a live teller. So it has a little bit more functions than just an ATM.
Any more questions for staff?
No.
Does the applicant have a presentation they'd like to make?
Sorry?
Do you have a presentation that you would like to make?
That was kind of the presentation. I mean, I wanted to explain what it was and what it's needed for, which is weather protection, being able to see at night when they're doing transactions when it's dark. It isn't backlit. It was going to be, it's not anymore. I think we've hit the dark sky lighting, 2 lights going down. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well with that, let's open the public hearing. So if there- anyone who would like to make a presentation, I don't know if there's anyone on Zoom now, anyone who would like to make comments from the public about this particular application, open the public hearing for your comments. You please state your name and address if you want to make a comment, and you have 3 minutes. I don't hear anyone, don't see anyone. All right, with that, we will close the public hearing. Okay, so now is our time to deliberate with regard to this application. Does anyone have any comments they'd like to start with?
I guess there was a comment that we don't have a specification for a canopy sign, is that right? I thought and maybe I don't understand it, but I was looking through the code and they do have canopy sign specifications. Is that something different than what this is?
Well, the sign isn't really on the canopy, and we do have regulations that would be for, signage that's directly on the canopy itself, and this is under the canopy. So again, this is just this strange situation that I don't know if anybody could have even contemplated. And that, we just, it's not a sign on the canopy.
That's a good question, a good distinction.
Yeah, it's a unique animal. It's a canopy, but the sign's not on the canopy.
Right, it's a sign under the canopy.
Yeah.
Any other things?
I'm just curious about something. Is the property owned or leased by the bank?
It's leased.
Thank you.
Yeah, several tenants in that,
So,
in that strip, I don't know, not really strip mall, but
Commercial center.
commercial center, yeah, retail center. So UC Health, Domino's, and Bank of Colorado have currently signed leases with
in the dentistry, right?
Dentistry.
Oh, and a dentist, I'm sorry, yes, yeah. Got a couple spots open.
One question that I do have for Steph, I just thought about was, has there been anybody else in that complex request a change in sign size or?
No, not at all, and in fact, we did let them know that the sign code was changing because they were right in getting ready to submit their signs so that they could have internally illuminated signs, and that's really the last of the internally illuminated signs that can happen in Berthoud are those there. But no one else requested additional signs. Had this been included with that bundle, it could have been an internally illuminated sign.
The businesses are very, very visible, the signs are. I mean, when you drive by, there's no mistaking what's in there, so if that's complying to our code, I think our code is working.
Yes, well, our code right now would prohibit those.
Yes.
Oh,
Cause it's backlit.
Yeah.
So they got in under the wire basically.
Mhm.
So nobody's.
okay, so like Domino's, if it's not backlit, what lights it up at night then?
It would have to be
Lights.
internally, light shining down on the sign so that the light source isn't going out.
Oh,
And that's how we get our dark sky
Okay.
compliance is not by having lights shining out, but the
Got it.
light shining onto what you want illuminated.
so those would be separate or independent lights
Mhm.
coming out from the building, then
Yeah.
shining back down on the sign?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So the light source would be directed to the
Got
sign
it.
versus the sign shining out.
Okay, any other discussion? I just have one comment, and that would be, having been outside driving when the weather is horrible, sleeting, snowing, that kind of thing, I kind of like the idea of the bigger sign that went, so I could see where the ATM was. So I like that whole idea. It directs the person. In my head, it's kind of a directional, for me, who doesn't have the best eyesight, I think it's kind of a directional sign for me.
Okay.
Any other comments?
I do have a comment. I guess I really like that commercial development over there. I think it's done very well and it looks very nice when you're driving through it. But one of the things I think, especially with the sign code and the building code, is to keep Berthoud quaint and like a small community and feel. And to me, the 27 square foot sign seemed very big. It actually seems bigger than most of the other signs in the development, I would say. And so it seemed excessive to me. I mean, and I don't want. I mean, I think that the canopy, the structure, the whole design, it looks nice in the pictures and stuff. But the sign really does seem. When I actually drove through, I got gas this morning, and I was looking around at it, and it just seemed like it didn't seem like the other signs were that big. And this is like an auxiliary sign compared to everything else. And you look at the drive-through for Starbucks and those kind of things, and they don't have large signs on them. So, I'm not saying no. I'm just saying it just seemed. I don't know what the rest of you think.
So
It just
so a
seemed like-
visual would be, if you looked at the screen there, the 3 feet and then it'd be twice as long. That'd be 21 square feet, so that's about how big it'd be. Two of those, but two of them lengthwise, not.
Yeah, it's 3 by 7.
Yeah.
Approximately.
Yeah,
3
so that's
feet by
about
7.
3 by 4, it looks like, somewhere in there.
3 by 7 would be 21. It's bigger than that, right?
Right.
To be
Oh, yeah, 27,
that's-
yeah.
Right.
4 by
Yeah, it's like-
8-ish.
3 by 9.
3 by 9, whatever.
It's super nice. It's quite big. That was my only thought. And then I was also looking at the other banks around here, and none of them have a sign even close to that big at the ATMs. So I don't know.
It's a good
But
point.
I would just I don't doubt that it's probably going to look fine. But it is a variance from a code that we just approved.
So it doesn't have to be yes or no, right? I mean, we could make can we make, I don't know, can we make a recommendation?
It really should be yes or no
Okay.
on the sign,
If there-
yeah, on the variance.
Because the question is, will we grant this variance in these specifications?
Okay.
Can I add a comment to Joe's?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I get what you're saying, but the back part of the canopy, right, to hold, to kind of cover the ATM,
Mhm.
it is big. I mean, it's big, it needs to be, ATM is at least this big, and so you're gonna get bigger to cover it. So it's and yes, it would be great if we could have it illuminated and lit up. It won't be. So it's gonna look like the back of a, I mean, you know, we could do a canopy without Bank of Colorado on it. And then it would just be the canopy would be back, black facing, right? This is just gonna have the name of the bank on it. But that's why it's big, it's just because it's the back part of the canopy. And then you got the portion that overhangs the ATM. And then on the other side of that, kind of that is, again, would have our letters on it, but and we can squeeze it up to be small, and cover it, but you might as, you know, there's a point where I want people to be able to see that, yes, that's where the ATM is, that's what it's there for, and then you pull kind of under that canopy. I really don't see it as a sign necessarily, I see it more as a canopy. And that's, I mean, the two different things. That signage on the back of the building, I call that a sign. This I call more of a canopy, something that protects the ATM, allows shelter from, you know, our customers who are doing the transactions. Thank you.
Joe, were you thinking maybe the wording should be kind of more condensed or?
So it's basically 4x7.
4x7. So is the drawing to scale? So compared to what the machine is?
Yes.
Any other comments? Did you have a comment?
No, I'm good.
I don't have
Feel free to say what you think.
no, I think I did say what I think. I mean, I'm mostly just concerned at like how do we want Bertha to look? You know, we've adopted these codes, we have restrictions on signs, and then this is a sign that would be, I guess, 4.5 times as big as what you would normally allow. So it seems quite large to me. That's my comment. Like I said, you drive through that commercial development and it does look somehow it still has kind of like a very nice feel to it when you go in that commercial development, even though it's a McDonald's and a Taco Bell. It feels like Berthoud, it doesn't feel like it's an exit on I-25, you know, and
You were getting a little bit too commercially here.
it seems a
Enough.
little bit,
Just wanna make sure I understand.
so that's what I would say.
We'll get them to-
Thanks for the comments. I think you're valid in what you're saying.
Yeah, I do too. We could get them to put a community board right there too, so we'll drive up things, see the community
I think
events
the
happening.
thing is, it's at the end, don't forget it's in the end of the parking lot, you know.
Well, it's facing the street.
Yeah, but I mean, it's at the end of the parking lot, you
And I
wanna make
guess-
sure people know what it is
Yeah,
and stuff like
sure.
that, you know, I mean, unless you're on a search mission, you don't want, you also wanna know where that thing is.
No, I think you make a valid point, Joe, and that's something we have to be really mindful of as we go through, you know, looking at signs and we have future variances with signs and that kind of thing. I'd like to see them maybe make it look a little bit more like Berthoud. Maybe there's a some type of, some way to put something on there that looks like, that reminds you of Berthoud. So maybe it's, since we're the garden spot, maybe it's some tree, some trees or something that, that would mitigate some of what I think what you're saying, if we could make it.
Well, there's a lot of landscaping around the perimeter of where this is already on the property. Landscaping, some boulders, rocks, things like that. And there, you really don't want landscaping up next to an ATM just from a safety perspective.
Will
I'm
those,
just trying to think how it's painted, you know.
is there gonna be landscaping between the
Yeah,
curb and like the driveway there?
I think they were busy to deal with that.
There will be landscaping. So as you're driving in, the ITM will be on your left, and then there will be landscaping on your right. To the north of that.
You can drive in on either side of the ATM, I believe.
No,
No,
No.
there's gotta be one way in, one way.
It's right
Yeah,
here.
there's an
Oh, you're
exhibit.
talking about-
There's 3 entrances, I thought,
Yeah,
on
yeah.
that side of the parking
Yeah,
lot.
yeah, yeah. No, I thought you were talking about right here.
Oh, I see.
Maybe we get the bank to consider posting community events as people drive up.
I think my,
It'll have directional sign through the
Yeah.
ATM. I mean, you're gonna wanna drive up as a driver. You'll be able to roll down your window and do the transaction under the canopy.
Out of curiosity, is it the size of the structure that concerns you? Like if the structure was blank, would you have the same concerns?
No, I don't think so, it's just, I don't think so.
I'm just trying to think about how do you mitigate that
I don't break my glass.
commercial feel and make it look a little bit more community-ish. You know, I know, maybe trying to mitigate some of that, I'm just not thinking, coming up with a good idea here yet. Any other comments folks have to make? Alright, well, at this point, then I'm going to ask if, or I'm going to entertain a motion with regard to this variance application. Commissioners? Anyone wanna make a
You guys have
motion?
any
No
questions?
question.
No motions?
Okay.
Well, yeah, go ahead, Nick. I was just gonna say, since we have either just 2 options, there's no like recommendations, then we might as well just make a
Right.
motion, yeah.
Okay, I suggest a motion for approval. To approve the variance for the Bank of Colorado at 1335 Grand Market Avenue with the development standards found in the staff report to be recorded with the resolution and find the criteria for approval listed in section 30-3-108-A-2 have been met.
I'll second.
So we have a motion and a second. Ms. Rieger, will you please take the roll?
Commissioner Hoffmans,
yes?
Commissioner Donnelly,
I'll say yes.
Commissioner Samadales,
Yes.
Commissioner Wing,
Yes.
Vice Chair Smith,
Yes.
Chairperson Anderson.
Yes. So that motion is passed. On to the next item on our agenda, which because we don't have any more business on the agenda, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn the Board of Adjustments meeting.
Motion to adjourn the Board of Adjustments meeting?
So moved, seconded. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Okay, passes. All right.
I have a question.
The motion
So
myself.
technically you can, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
technically I could do it, but it's kind of not the preferred way to say it. Okay, with that, let's open the Plan Commission meeting for March 28th. The commission meeting is now open at 6:35. Terry?
Chairperson Anderson. Vice Chair Smith.
Here, still here.
Commissioner Wing. Commissioner Semidallis.
Here.
Commissioner Donnelly.
Here.
Commissioner Hoffmans.
And we've made the executive decision that we don't have to do the pledge of allegiance again for this meeting. We're gonna carry over the pledge of allegiance from the previous meeting. Yay, right?
I think that's a wise
Approved.
move.
Okay, with that, we do have minutes from a previous meeting to approve. So we need to take a look at those, if you would. I'm trying to find my copies here. Those are from the March 14th meeting. So are there any, is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Motion to approve.
Motion's been made, is there a second?
I second.
And a second? Been made, all those in favor, actually, would you take the roll, Terry?
Commissioner Hoffmans.
Excuse me,
And
We're-
a motion
we're-
to approve the minutes, and we're taking a vote.
We're taking a vote on the minutes for March 14th. You say yes?
yes?
Yes.
Okay, Commissioner Donnelly.
Here. So are we voting on the minute? I'm
Voting on the
sorry.
minute.
We're all
I
mixed up
apologize,
tonight. No, we're doing
apologize.
this so many times, it's okay.
Let me explain this again. We are now,
Yes.
we've switched from the
yes.
Board of Justice meetings now to the Plan Commission meeting, and we need to approve the minutes for March 14th.
Yes, I approve the minutes.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Semidallis.
Yes.
Commissioner Wing.
Yes.
Vice Chair Smith.
Yes.
Chairperson Anderson.
Yes. Okay, so we've approved the minutes. Now, one of the things that we need to do, that since we, in despair, we no longer have Jonathan, so and he was our secretary, we need to elect someone from this group to be the secretary on this plan commission. So would one of you like to fill that role?
I nominate Nick.
Oh, I'll second.
Nick's nominated and seconded, all those in favor? Aye.
Hi.
Opposed, nay? All right,
was
so
fast.
Nick, you are the new secretary.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Yeah, was this okay with
What do I
you?
need to do?
Sort of like voluntold almost. Okay, all right, so with that, since we have no other business other than the minutes and the nomination and approval of our secretary, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the Plan Commission meeting of March 28th.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Motion and second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. We are adjourned. Now, I gotta get to the third one here. Can't switch these fast enough. All right, so now we need to call to order the Plan Commission study session of March 28th. Call that to order at about 6:39, is that about right? I can't see it very well. Okay, about 6:39 PM. So with that, we have a guest speaker tonight, Tammy Tanu. As some of you know, because she has come before some of us before, some of you she would be new. And Tammy is going to give us more information. Tammy, can you tell us first about your background again for those of our plan commissioners that are new, and then give us an idea of what you're gonna present to us tonight in study session.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Chairperson and members of the commission. My name is Tammy Tenoy, and I'm the Executive Director at CIRSA, which is your public entity self-insurance pool. So in the event that your commission or the council or the staff or some other board of or commission gets into trouble, and that trouble is within the scope of the coverage that CIRSA provides, why then we are here for you and we will partner with you to make sure that whatever claim or lawsuit is resolved in a in an appropriate and satisfactory fashion. So that is our mission at CIRSA. My own background is as a municipal attorney. I was a city or town attorney for many, many years before I joined CIRSA full-time. And so I did work with cities primarily in the Front Range on all of the things that cities and towns do. And in so doing, I did get to observe the ways in which councils and planning commissions could either, get themselves into trouble or avoid trouble from a liability standpoint. So That's gonna be sort of the focus of my discussion, and also just process issues. I guess I should ask, how many are new to the commission?
What's new?
Well, if you were here last year, I won't call you new.
Have you heard Tammy speak before us?
Yeah.
So new.
She spoke last March. So if you were appointed after March of 2023, then you're new. Great definition, who's new? Okay, well. So Nick, Joe, Mark, and maybe Brett.
Right.
Yeah, well, congratulations on your appointment to the planning commission. I would say, this is one of the boards and commissions that has a lot of action. And so it really is, I think, a great place in which to serve. And I know that the citizens of the community are very, very appreciative of the work that the commission does. So I will be speaking on quasi-judicial issues, but I would like to be interrupted early and often with questions or discussions or pushback. And we'll certainly have some opportunities for discussion of some key points like, deliberating on the evidence and what that looks like. And also, how you marry up the evidence that you hear at a hearing with the legal criteria that apply to your decision. I'd like to particularly focus on discussion around that. But do stop me, please, at any point if you have any questions or would like further discussion on any point. So again, congratulations, and this is, I guess, a refresher or an intro on liability risks and sort of prevention suggestions, best practices surrounding quasi-judicial issues. And I will give you my standard disclaimer that this is intended to be a training resource only. And last time around, we had your town attorney here to correct me if I had any areas where she wanted clarification or correction, and or it gave me the opportunity to throw the hard questions to her. But we will try to get along without that. If there are any hard questions or questions that I can't answer, then I certainly will make note of those and make sure that Erin or her team are able to answer them for you. There are some resources primarily for elected officials on the SRSA website, but I would say some of the materials that we have for elected officials do very much coincide with the work of the Planning Commission in particular, because the Planning Commission has in common with the council a primary responsibility for quasi-judicial decision making. And in this regard, we've been doing videos for years, and we are just now rolling out a brand new one, which I hope that we can show you tonight. One of the things that we did with this iteration of the elected and appointed officials video was to break it up into pieces so that those portions that are, especially pertinent to one group's work over another can be kind of segregated out, and so you can listen to 4 minutes instead of 17. So can we start by doing that?
What is the acronym? What does it stand for?
SRSA. I apologize. It's the Colorado Intergovernmental Risk Sharing Agency. So we kind of look like an insurance company, but we are created by our members, which are all cities, towns, and other public entities within the state of Colorado.
And so all planning commissions like this across the state are covered by this?
Not all, but every city or town that is a member of SRSA,
Okay.
which would encompass about 90% of cities and towns in Colorado, are, and so yes, that would include planning commissions.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so Tammy, it's more like a risk-sharing pool that we elect to be a part of.
That's exactly right. That is exactly.
And do you know if metro districts share in the same thing by any chance, or is that?
Good question. They have their counterpart pool, which is the Special District Association pool.
Okay.
And so, yes, they do work similar to what we do, but on behalf of special districts and
Okay.
metro
Thank you.
districts. Yes. Is the link embedded in there? We should be able to get it. Okay, great. too long. I'll say skip verification.
If you're like many elected or appointed officials, you probably see your role first and foremost as being a policymaker, as someone who brings their own ideas and perspectives to your boards or council's discussions
Yeah.
of the important policy issues facing your community. In this role, you advocate for your own views, you lobby your fellow elected officials, and are lobbied by citizens,
Yeah, we
and you
just-
even research and develop your own ideas on policy issues. In short, in this role, you do the things that legislators do. But being a legislator is only part of the job. At other times, you and your fellow board or council members make decisions affecting the property rights of
Well,
individual
and we're
applicants.
sorry,
And this
we've
role
had
requires
some
you to
technical
conduct yourself like a
difficulties
judge. In
that
this
were-
role, you are making what the law calls quasi-judicial
I will
decisions,
cover all of
where you
these
have an
issues
obligation
in
to
greater
ensure due
detail,
process.
Actually, but it kind of sums up nicely, what the quasi-judicial responsibilities are, and does so in a humorous fashion, which is a rare and unusual thing when, lawyers are speaking, so. Okay. So I would say that, among the citizenry, the quasi-judicial role is a relatively little-known one for boards, commissions, as well as the town board. Did you know before you became an expert on this issue that actually there was a quasi-judicial role for, councils and boards, for instance? Right? It's not the first thing you think when you think municipal service. You don't really think, okay, well, I'm gonna be a judge of sorts now that I am in this position. But you are indeed very much a judge, and I shouldn't even say a judge of sorts, because you are judges when you're acting in a quasi-judicial capacity. And, although relatively little known, the stakes are very high if you don't familiarize yourself with the rules of engagement around quasi-judicial work, and you can see why the stakes are high. You're dealing with property rights and property values, and particularly in this part of the state, we are talking, eye-popping values when it comes to the value of the various properties and the landowners and the applicants who come before you. And so, missteps can be extremely expensive. We have on occasion at SURSA, paid on behalf of our members pretty large sums for missteps that occurred in the quasi-judicial process. So, it is a very real risk of liability. So I would say your responsibilities can be broadly broken out into two. One is kind of big picture, right? You are looking at things like the comprehensive plan, land use plans, transportation plans, park and open space plans, that kind of thing. And when you're looking at sort of the big picture and looking at the big picture on behalf of the citizenry as a whole, then you are not acting in a quasi-judicial capacity. But when you drill down to an individual application that involves an individual property owner or developer or other applicant, then that is most likely to be a quasi-judicial function. So when you compare, the big picture types of activities that I will broadly call legislative versus these individual applications that are called quasi-judicial, I think you can kind of contrast legislative versus quasi-judicial to get a pretty good idea of what the rules of engagement are. So if you were to be asking, should we have a contractor licensing code? Or should we be strengthening our code provisions around, weeds and brush and nuisances and that kind of thing? Or, as happened some years ago around a lot of cities and towns, should we have a pit bull ban?
Should we repeal a pit bull ban, right? Those were kind of big picture issues, and so legislator, and that kind of implies the rules of engagement. Have any of you ever been to the state legislature when it's in session? Yeah, it's not pretty watching the sausage being made, but it certainly is very instructive, right? And you see many things happening when it's a legislative setting and a legislative activity that you would never think of doing in a quasi-judicial setting. So, as an example, lobbyists. Are there lobbyists in the state legislature? Most certainly. You know, some would say they probably run the place. I would say we wish. You know, I was a lobbyist for the Colorado Municipal League, and I will say my greatest wish would have been that we ran the place, but we didn't. But we certainly did, you know, go to individual legislators and lobby them on things. We would single people out and give them information in the hallway or in their offices, and then we would say, would you please vote our way, right? Okay, in the legislative session, it is a permissible activity. Or citizens contacting legislators on bills, is that a permissible activity? Right? Have you ever sent an email or a letter to a legislator? I certainly have many a time, and the purpose of that is to try to influence them to vote my way. Again, perfectly okay in a legislative setting. Or do legislators work together to kind of try to get things done on a, you know, team basis? Absolutely, right? They get together before any hearings, they form coalitions, they bring in interest groups, they try to negotiate with the opposition, and all of these things probably happen in, you know, way before any hearing. They probably start happening in October, right? If you're a responsible lobbyist, you're starting that lobbying process many months before, you know, the legislature is even in session. Is that okay? Absolutely okay in the legislative context. Or, you know, communicating early and often as a legislator with your constituency. Do you hear from those who represent you here in Berthoud? You know, my guess is that some of your representatives do come to council meetings and say, here I am, would you like to, you know, talk about anything with me? You know, that's a common thing that your representatives in the State House do, and it's perfectly okay for them to come to you and solicit your opinions. Again, perfectly okay in a legislative context. And then, of course, at the end of all that, then they vote, having been influenced, having influenced one another, and it's perfectly okay because that's the legislature and those are the rules of engagement for legislation. So I would say those kinds of loose rules of engagement are probably permissible when you're acting in an equivalent capacity, in a quasi-legislative capacity, and doing things like looking at the master plan for, you know, potential updates, you know, thinking about and perhaps enacting other kinds of town-wide plans. So, you know, there's certainly a place for that kind of legislative style of contact between you and citizens, but only when it's your legislative type work. So let's say then that in addition to these big picture plans, you see on your agenda that there is a request to subdivide a parcel into 4 smaller parcels. Is that a legislative activity? No, it's quasi-judicial. It's one property, it's one applicant, and they are asking for you to decide their rights under a particular set of criteria. Or rezoning a property, same, right? It's an individual property and they're saying, we'd like to exercise our right to ask you to rezone the property. Or platting property into several lots and tracts, authorizing a variance, right? Quasi-judicial. non-conforming use and asking for an alteration to a non-conforming use, quasi-judicial. So in these kinds of site-specific actions, it's important not to think in terms of state capitol and legislature, but judge and courtroom, because the rules of engagement that apply in this context are quite similar to those that judges follow when they're deciding matters that come before them. So I noted all of these activities that people do under the Gold Dome in the legislature, perfectly okay, but you almost want to flip those and say everything that's okay, right, in that context is not okay in the quasi-judicial context. If you flip them when you're thinking quasi-judicially, then that really is probably your safest bet. So let's quickly arrive at a definition of what quasi-judicial actually means. You know, I've given you some examples, but I haven't really defined the term for you. So typically it is a decision affecting property rights at an individual level, not town-wide and not, you know, everybody who is similarly situated, just that individual applicant. And also the decision is one that is made upon the basis of specific criteria that already exist, typically in your land use codes. And your responsibility is to listen to the testimony and the other evidence that you hear at a hearing, and then to marry up the existing legal criteria to the evidence that you hear to arrive at the right decision. So that essentially is the definition of quasi-judicial. And typically in quasi-judicial matters, notice and a public hearing is required under the applicable ordinances, right? You've got to give notice to the individual landowner, right, whose rights are about to be affected, or they don't have necessarily the opportunity to be heard and to give their testimony and evidence. So notice, a public hearing, and then a decision based upon the record of the hearing. So typically, these kinds of hearings are recorded, right? And there could come a time when that recording will become important. When you receive evidence, it is entered into the record and becomes part of the record of that hearing.
May I interject into
Yes.
that, Tammy? Thank you. So when you all are up here on the dais, when you're talking, we need to make sure that we capture every conversation into the record, every discussion item, because that is part of the deliberation on a decision. So speaking loud and clear into the microphone will help Terry. When we have people come up to the podium to speak, just making sure that they're saying their names, we're getting their names down on the paper, just in case it would ever come that we would need a court reporter's printout of the hearing.
Exactly right. And you know, I should just kind of stop and give you a small aside, which is this, that you know, in your capacity as planning commission, most of your decisions are not final, right? They are recommendations that go forward to the town board. Now, when you're acting in your capacity as Board of Adjustment, your decisions are indeed final, right? There's no place else, for the most part, that they can go to. And so those are final decisions that are appealable to the district court. And in the event that that appeal were to happen, then as Ann mentioned, right, somebody's got to listen to the tape of that hearing and make a verbatim transcript so that the judge can read what happened at this hearing and take that into account along with everything else. So it is a really critical piece. You know, it's critical either way, I think, to make a clean, clear record, but it does become especially critical when you're acting in your Board of Adjustment capacity.
We also are the final step for final plats too. So in that capacity, if we were to, for some reason, decide not to approve one and someone felt like they were aggrieved because of that, that would be appealable to the district court as well, so that's why that's so important, our deliberations on those things are really important.
So assuming that your hearing was done correctly, right, that you listened to the evidence and the testimony and you applied the legal criteria and you arrived at a decision that made sense of both, then you're gonna be in good shape, right, from an appeal standpoint and from a liability standpoint. And so doing the hearing correctly, right, making sure that the process was followed properly is really your best protection in terms of, you know, your decision being bulletproof, and also your best protection in terms of, you know, being able to avoid other potential liability risks. So, you know, and it's a pretty deferential standard that the court uses, right? The court will look at the transcript, look at the law, and, you know, the other evidence that you guys had before you, and they will say, did you exceed your jurisdiction or abuse your discretion, right? Exceeding your jurisdiction is kind of hard to do because, you know what your jurisdiction is, you know what the, you know, four corners of your responsibilities are, but, you know, abusing your discretion, right, is also a pretty lenient standard. It means, you know, you kind of went south when the evidence, right, and the legal criteria pointed north. So, you know, unless you did one of those things, then your decision will be upheld on appeal.
I have a clarifying question.
Yes.
On the aspect of conducting the hearing correctly,
Yes.
we've in recent weeks had situations where we would conclude a public hearing, but there were people who would still like to make comments. Can you maybe describe the risks associated with that or how we
Yes.
deal with it?
Yes, I love that question, and I am sure you guys handled it absolutely properly. But we actually had that very case in one of our member cities. And if you wanna say, you know, Berthoud property values are like scary high, you know, Cherry Hills Village also pretty scary high, right? And so this was back in the 90s, and I can talk about it because the case bounced up and down the judicial system for years and years. It involved the Board of Adjustment, and the Board of Adjustment had a controversial hearing, and they heard from the applicant, right? There weren't any citizens in the room, which was surprising considering it was a controversial matter, right? I think it had to do with lot sizes probably, which what you can imagine, right, would be controversial. But no citizens, so they closed the hearing and said, applicant, thank you very much. You know, we're not gonna take any action at this time, but we'll close the hearing and move on to our next agenda item. Well, halfway through their next agenda item, a whole group of citizens rushes in and they're like, we are so sorry. We thought that this hearing was for now, not an hour ago. Can you please, Madam Chairman, allow us to testify? What do you think that the chairperson did?
I think they said yes.
They did say yes. And it wasn't because they wanted to deprive the applicant of the opportunity to hear what the citizens were saying, right? And to be able to rebut any of that testimony. They were just trying to be polite, right, to the citizens who wanted to speak. But it certainly did result in a pretty significant liability.
Why?
Why? Because the applicant said, had we been there, we would have had the opportunity to rebut that testimony, but you closed the hearing and then you reopened it without giving us the opportunity to listen and to rebut.
So is the second part of what you said important? So if nobody was challenging, does the law say black and white, you can't reopen it? Or are you saying there's mitigating circumstances to where does somebody, the other party, have an opportunity to defend themselves, for lack of a better word?
Yeah.
So which is it?
It's a great question, and I would say in very lawyerly fashion, probably a little of both,
Okay.
right? I would say that the injury happened, right, because they didn't have the opportunity to essentially confront the testimony, right? They didn't have that opportunity. But the process also wasn't kosher anyway, right? Once the hearing is closed, you ought to have the permission of everybody to say, is it okay if we reopen? You shouldn't just be like, okay, we'll just reopen it on our own.
So that happened, I think it happened twice, I know
Yeah.
for sure it happened once. Do you remember the circumstances? Cause there was a resident who wanted to speak after we closed it, we would not let them. Or they came in late, but I don't think they came in late. Do you remember what happened there?
Oh, there might have been some like mitigating circumstance where something was like not noticed properly or something. Like there was a confusion in the time one night.
We missed a publication deadline and
Yeah.
people came to give testimony. And we just told them you can come back another time because there had been staff wasn't going to make a presentation. You all can make a decision to take that testimony depending on what Aaron or Tammy suggest. However, you have to give the applicant the opportunity to rebut.
So again, what I'm hearing is we do have the authority to open it back up if we so choose, if the applicant is still present and can respond. Is that what I'm hearing?
If you wanna get on that hamster wheel, go for it.
What I wanna do is I wanna be respectful to, I come from 45 years of taking care of customers. It's my DNA, I take care of customers. So when I see a resident and they wanna say something, and because something slipped through the cracks where they didn't and it closed, my personality is one that I'd like to give them the chance to speak. And so knowing that we legally can do that is helpful.
If that's what you want to do, it's
Yeah, there is a measure of
Probably
risk.
not recommended,
So-
but it's-
So does
Can't
the
happen.
does the board have to come to any kind of consensus to reopen it?
I would say it's not just the board, it is all of the participants, all of the parties. If you can get everybody, who had a right to speak or would have had a right to speak to say, yeah, go ahead and reopen, then and I don't talk about this in the presentation, but let me talk about the cleansing power of waiver, okay? Waiver means people were present and you looked at them and you asked them, is it okay if we do this? And they nodded their heads up and down, and the chairperson said, oh, let the record reflect that everybody nodded their heads, yes, and so we'll go ahead and reopen, right? That's one of the ways in which you can use the cleansing power of waiver, which is that everybody said, oh, fine, go ahead, or nobody objected,
Okay.
right? If you can get to that point where everybody says, okay, fine, or nobody who has is in a position to object, does object, right?
Yeah.
Then fine, go for it.
Maybe
But-
ask the question, is someone against the fact that we opened the case, something like that? Someone asked the audience, first we check if everybody is there.
Yeah.
And we ask them, are you okay to reopen the case because we have.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I have another question. Last session, we had a presentation and people from the city coming. And one person had the chance to present for 3 minutes. And after our discussion, that person tried to talk again. And we had to say, no, I mean, your time is gone.
Yeah.
So how is it possible? Because I understand, as you say, customer service, he came to present, and then there was a lot of discussion, and he probably has other things to say. How does that work? Because the guy was a little bit frustrated at the end of the room, saying, okay, well, I cannot talk anymore, and he was still talking anyway.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah,
it's tough, I think, too, in those types of situations, because they may not feel like they got to say everything they wanted to say in their 3 minutes, and typically, though, I think staff does a good job of talking to them afterwards. It's tough for us to be able to talk to them. I think we leave that kind of staff to try to mitigate some of their frustration for them. if we talk to them, then we're in trouble for having these little ex parte conversations, you know, so we're not really supposed to do that either. But I was also gonna comment on when you mentioned that maybe if everybody agreed, we could reopen, that really makes me nervous in the sense that I would wanna make sure that I brought the applicant up and have them say,
Yes.
record, where it's recorded, here's my name and yes, I
Yeah.
agree.
Absolutely. Get that in the transcript, yes.
Yeah.
And it's really, I mean, opening it up and then you close it again and then the applicant rebuts and then, oh, but I have another thing to say.
Right.
And then you open it again and then there
Yeah.
has to be a SIR rebuttal and then, oh, I changed my mind, I wanna say this again. And it's a never ending conversation. And so that's why it's so important when the chair says, if there's no one else that wants to say anything, we're going to close public testimony. And that is their sign to know, oh, you know what, I really do wanna say one more thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
or forever hold
But
your
then they
peace.
can do it. Even if they came 3 minutes before, they can come again and still talk and explain.
Well, let's
Depending on
talk
the-
about that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So, you know, I would categorize that under no good deed goes unpunished, okay? Because if you give that person 3 more minutes, or if you don't cut them off at 3 minutes, then the next person who is cut off at 3 minutes is gonna be really mad. Or they're gonna be like, well, you gave him an extra minute because you liked what he was saying. You don't like what I'm saying, and so you're cutting me off at 3 minutes, right? Or, you know, today it might be that there's only 2 people who wanna use their 3 minutes apiece. But what if you have an entire room full of people, right? And everybody wants to be heard, you want to hear everybody, but you know, you don't wanna be here until 3 AM, 3 minutes at a time. And so I feel pretty strongly that if you have set a limit for public comments, you really need to stick with that limit or your good deed will be punished over
Okay.
and over again.
Because
I
there's a
promise.
concept of due process. You say everybody's going to have 3 minutes, somebody goes over, but then the other person that just got up said, well, I wish I would have had my extra 30 seconds. And planning commission voted against the way I wanted it to go. And my due process was squashed because I couldn't say everything that I wanted to. And they let other people go beyond their 3 minutes.
Who keeps the time?
Well, and if,
Terry?
Terry does?
Yeah.
That's great.
and I think if we had a
I'm not saying, I don't know.
I will now.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that, yeah, we have historically had people that go over 3 minutes, and when there's only 2 or 3 people giving testimony, it's
Yeah.
really hard to say, okay, time to stop, but I agree that when you get into a bigger group, then suddenly there's this expectation that people stop at 3 minutes, and that's
Whose
awkward.
responsibility is it that their time's up?
chair's gotta say.
Yeah, I think it would be the chair, yeah.
Yep, and I've been on planning commissions before, and I've been a chairperson of the Larimer County Planning Commission. And I've had other chair people before me be very abrupt, that's it, you're done, 3 minutes is over, sit down, next person come up.
Nice.
And you can also say, thank you for your presentation, but your time is now up. But it's treating everybody exactly the same, and then you're not gonna get in trouble with a threat that you did not allow due process.
So do I signal? Or how do I let?
There have been, you can get
You wish there was
timers
a
that
timer.
go on the screen.
Okay.
That
Yeah,
would be
ask
good,
Christian
they're
for
free
it.
apps, so I would highly suggest you have, you know, a 3-minute countdown timer.
Yes,
so that
correct, yeah.
people can see.
And
That's what I
and
know
a
there.
system and a system with lights, you know. I mean, no, I'm not
No,
joking.
I hear
I
you.
was in so many medical meetings and they wanna talk, some are talking forever. So at the end, they were having green,
Yes.
yellow and red.
Yep.
And green is fine, yellow 30-second remaining and then red. I mean, it's clear for everyone.
That's what the Supreme Court does.
Well, I've worked for a legislature where they did have that, particularly for contentious issues. You knew if you were a legislator, you had so much time to speak. and when they had the different lights like that.
Yeah.
Once you hit the red light, they cut your
Yeah.
microphone.
So, and I guess it's feasible on one of the screens. Well, I'm not saying it's easy, but theory, I mean, but,
it's- And we may have to do that, and when we have
well, we
certain
can do it with the
contentious-
phone if people are coming in the next sessions, I can be responsible for
No,
that.
Terry's gonna do that.
Well,
Or
and
Terry, yeah.
and with certain contentious
Wanna
issues,
help
and we will probably have more of them happening, because we are a growing community and not everybody agrees on everything.
Yeah.
Particularly how we're growing and that kind of thing, and so we will have those kinds of contentious hearings, and we're going to have to set the rules out ahead
Yeah.
of time and be very strict about about those rules, and showing empathy, obviously, but we, as far as we know you have your time and that kind of thing, we do wanna hear you, this is important to all of us, however, here's what the rules are. We're gonna have to do that, and which is something that I kinda wanted to bring up with you is, we know we're gonna have some of these types of things coming up, and we know that people are very emotional about some of these things. So what are some tips that you would have as we're trying to make sure that our decisions are based on reason, that we're applying, our particular standards to that particular land use issue, we don't get emotional, and that we try to take some of the emotion out of this. What are some of your tips for doing that?
Yeah, I would say one is, when you have just this kind of potential free-for-all that could break out, I would say respecting the authority of the chairperson by word and deed and by example is really, really important, right? Everybody here can model the behavior that you wanna see on this side of the room. I think, that's probably a primary tip. If you're disregarding the authority of the chairperson, then nobody is going to respect that authority. So that's one. Having a written script. Do you guys do written scripts? It can be helpful because I was a hearing officer for many years. I would say from my first hearing to my very last, I would create a script for every hearing because it's easy to kind of, are we in rebuttal? Are we in surrebuttal? How many of these, right? If it's all laid out, then, you can do these in a very orderly fashion. Perfect, beautiful.
In case we need it.
Another is to watch the emotional temperature in the room, right? And do all you can to keep it tamped down. If you need to take a recess, any one of you can ask for a recess, right? And just kind of let things cool down a little bit. Having pro and con signature opportunities can help you manage the flow of testimony, right? So, not just have a sign-up sheet, but, are you here, what issue are you here for? And are you speaking pro or con if you care to identify yourself, right? That can kind of help you organize.
I've seen that done in
the
legislative
speakers.
hearings too.
Yeah, exactly. What else? I'm sure more will come to me, but those I think are some basic suggestions. Also, not taking the bait when the testimony turns into questions, right? And this is particularly, I think, common for citizens, right, who may not be accustomed to presenting information in this format, and so they'll come up, be recognized, and they'll be like, I wanna know why, right? And I think one thing you can do is kind of say, we're here to take your testimony, and so if you can frame your, comments in terms of sort of statements rather than questions, then they're probably going to be more valuable for their evidentiary value. This is controversial. I don't know if you swear in your witnesses.
No, I wish we would.
It's controversial because maybe for the first year or two after you start this practice, people are gonna be looking cross-eyed at you, right? And they're not gonna understand why they have to raise their right hand and, swear before, right? But it does lend a measure of formality, and then it kinda is a signal. I'm here to testify. I'm not just here to ask questions. I'm here to put information in the record and not just kinda, ask a lot of questions. So it might be something to
And
think about.
not to stir a lot of drama, because a lot of the public testimony is going to be very emotional. Individuals aren't going to understand the land use planning process. They're, for instance, we're just being candid amongst ourselves. It could be, my realtor told me that this was always going to be a farm field. And now here you are, you're developing 5-story apartment buildings and all of these things that are going to destroy my life and devalue my property. And it's coming from a deep place of emotion. Did the realtor have the right to tell them this is always going to be a farm field? It's zoned heavy industrial. So it's the question, people are going to be very emotional.
Is the swearing in, you tell the whole truth? Is that what
Yes.
we're asking them? Oh.
Did you do that at the Larimer County Planning Commission?
No, and I've never been part of a planning commission or in my time as a planner that have ever done that. Have you seen that, Ton, where you've worked?
I don't think I have. I don't think.
Seen it either.
Would it be just as effective maybe to have, make sure that people have signed in if they're gonna speak when they come in the room, and then we could even make the sign up sheet so it's in favor of this issue, against this issue, whatever.
That would be helpful. Also, what would be helpful, and I don't know, you guys may already do this, is to have on your website sort of a basic, short explanation of the quasi judicial process. Longmont, I think, might have that. Because it is a very strange, unnatural setting, and so if people can read up about it, then they will feel more comfortable.
Is most of what you're going over today, is it also applicable to the town board? I mean, are they identical?
Pretty much, yes.
Okay.
Pretty much, yes. Yeah, I would say yes.
So you're saying be in these when we we should be as structured and make sure we provide that, remind the audience of that structure, at the beginning, so that they realize that there's certain parameters they have to fall within.
Exactly.
Does the town board not operate in a legislative capacity?
The town board, oh, very much, very
Yeah.
much. I would say that they have plenty of legislative things, but
So I
they
guess
also have
that's the
quasi
difference.
judicial.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you're saying we need to make sure we adhere to the formality. And when I think about that, I actually about 2 months ago, and to be brief about this, but I listened to a legislative hearing, not in Colorado one, a different state. And I was listening to the legislative hearing, and there was a lot of emotion about a particular issue. And you had people on both sides testifying. So what the chair did of that committee was they did do this by pro and con. You'd have so many pros, you'd have so many cons, and then go back and forth. But it was really easy to see who the chair favored, because they would really abruptly cut off the ones that they didn't want to hear from. And then they at one point said, well, that's not what it says in the legislation, so you can't testify to that. And oh my goodness, I sat there and a friend of mine was listening, she lives in a different state, right? And I'm in my chat writing to her, oh my God, did you just hear that? Is there a due process lawsuit in the making here?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was horrible, and they just didn't do the chair did not do a good job.
And certainly, there's a fairness perception issue there, but at the end of the day, those legislators are acting legislatively, and so they can be partisan, they can be unfair, and you guys certainly do not have that latitude in your quasi judicial work, so.
At least we have the US Congress to set the professional example for us. So that's-
Yes, yeah. I always say that the people who serve municipal government are the grown-ups in the room. And that is true, more true today than ever before. So I really thank you always for setting the right example for, the things that should be done the way they are in governance. So I do thank you for that. Let's see, so, you know, where do these rules come from, these rules of engagement around quasi judicial matters? I was doing one of these talks at a CML conference, and at the end, one of the, you know, mayors that I know raised her hand and she said, Tammy, all these rules around quasi judicial, these are just the ways in which you attorneys try to control us. And yeah, that's what I said. I was like, oh my gosh, I have just been cut to the quick. That really, really hurts. But, you know, I maybe gave that impression and I should not have, right? So now I sort of preface these rules by saying, you know, what we're here, you know, as your town attorney, certainly what we're here as your SURSA person, you know, why we are here pounding on these rules of engagement is two things. One, we want to protect your prerogative and your responsibility to properly participate in a hearing, right? And some of these rules of engagement, if they're not followed, kind of end up depriving you of the opportunity to do the very job that you're here for, right? Because you start to look too biased to be an unbiased decision maker. So that's one reason. And another is, of course, we want to protect you and the town and the decision that you ultimately reach. There's nothing more satisfying than to have a decision of yours appealed and to have the confidence going to the district court. This decision is bulletproof. We are going to prevail, right? Because most of the time, if you do things correctly, you will prevail, either before the district court or if somehow they get it wrong, in the Court of Appeals, right? And so we want to protect your prerogative and we want to protect the decision. And, you know, these requirements are not just kind of made up, they're not history or tradition, they actually do come out of the US Constitution and the provisions around due process. And of course, we know that when the Constitution is violated, there are consequences, right? And so, you know, in addition to losing potentially your right to participate, in addition to, you know, losing on an appeal of your decision, you can end up with some pretty hefty constitutional violations that we end up having to defend and potentially settle or lose in court.
So, and if I may, if we would ever be accused, is that a 402, 401 action of?
106, yeah.
106, thank you. If we would ever be faced with a 106 action, it will keep development and us in limbo for years
On that one item or?
on that one item.
Okay.
And I know of cases that have been delayed and developments have been delayed for 10 years because an audience member says, you gave somebody else extra time, you gave someone else an extra time to speak and more time, and my time was not honored, and therefore you didn't do your job and you went outside your box. So it can be, especially when emotions are really high, it's very difficult. Yeah.
And I think like tonight, when you asked about what our parameters were, I think it's always really important for us to know that.
Yes.
And so that we can, as much as we might have wanted to do something different, that was outside of what those parameters were, we can't do that. And I've sat, you know, as I told you all before, my third plan commission, I've sat in there are times when my heart was saying, boy, I really wish we could go in this direction. But I knew, here's what our criteria was, and here's what our latitude was to go vary from that. And we had to do it with that in mind, whether my heart said that wasn't the right thing or not. You know, it's hard.
Your follow-up comment just now, that was very helpful to me, giving that example, because I'm not that I bend the rules, but I really like people to have their say, but after you state it the way you just stated it,
Yeah.
that makes, I mean, that
Total
will help
sense.
me
It's
in the
hard.
future make that decision, because it's really, you're not doing it to be mean or disrespectful or anything else, it's really
Exactly.
what's good for everyone is why you're doing that, really.
Yep, and you all, Tammy, this planning commission is actually excellent because during deliberations, you will say, like last time, there's been a lot of discussion about this issue. This is our box. And there are those gray times where that issue does impact the criteria for approval. And even though it might not have been a direct outcome of what we were doing, the future, there could be impacts, and there's that gray area. But this planning commission is actually really good about stopping and saying, hey, wait a minute, have we gone outside our box? What is our box? And then there's even really good discourse and dialogue about, okay, are we in our box? And they discuss amongst themselves, and it's actually really, this is a great group of planning commissioners.
That's beautiful.
So in fact, the more we stick to the rules, the less we open the door for discussion. Well, not discussion, but challenges or something like that.
The two legal challenges,
Yeah, yeah.
that's correct, and I
Legal
think,
challenges, yes.
yeah, Anne made a great point about developments can be hung up for years, right? It's happened, the Cherry Hills Village case I mentioned. I'm gonna guess
So
that was up
may
and
look,
down for decades.
yeah, it may look rude for us to say, no, you had 3 minutes, sir, that's done. Because as a human person, you want to give the opportunity to other people, but then you open the box to something much more challenging in the future, so yeah.
It's that balance between the bond that we have with our fellow citizens and doing legally what we're required to do.
Yeah.
You know, and it's, yeah, that's
Is something getting appealed, is that a super rare anomaly? Or I would imagine, does it happen more to certain boards than others, or is there any kind of rule of thumb for that?
In my career, I've been on the periphery of one appeal, on the periphery of another appeal, and then actually I was the case manager for something that got approved, but the neighbors just didn't want it to happen and wouldn't let it go. And so I had to testify for that as just being the project manager. So that's 30 years, 3 times.
Okay.
And twice, I just happened to know about it because colleagues were in it and I only had to do it once.
Just to kind of give you sort of my record on it, I guess we had, 7 to 9 municipalities that we represented, each of whom had quasi judicial matters. And I would say we did not have one quasi judicial appeal a year, it was less than one a year. And this is the kind of boast that an attorney only makes if she hasn't had enough cases, but we never lost a one, ultimately. One actually had to go all the way to the Court of Appeals, but they saw the light where the district court didn't. But that's a lot of time and a lot of money down the
You bet.
drain to fight over it.
A ton of
So,
money.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, I was gonna say, and so one thing we could do is say, all right, there's no one online, there's no one in the room. Anybody else want to, and you do this and maybe just say, all right, I'm closing public testimony.
more explicit for the record.
Versus what do we do now?
We do that, but Karen has and she does it and you do an amazing job, and I don't know, just keep doing it.
Oh,
And when we have a big room of people, maybe just a more commanding voice, maybe.
Yeah. I'm pretty, I speak really softly.
You have to hammer though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could just throw it if they can.
Oh, excuse enough.
I had a question. I mean, you mentioned a situation where they had the hearing and then a room full of people showed up who had the time wrong. but don't those people, I mean, if the time was wrong, maybe that's their fault and so. But it just seems to me because having the public legally has should have an opportunity to voice their opinion. So if we went on in that kind of situation, then they all showed up and we didn't open up the case, would they also have potentially have the rights to appeal the case on the grounds that there was not an opportunity for public testimony?
I would say they would have a weaker case than the applicant did for being told he could leave and then having the hearing
And then
reopened.
open up
But
it.
you know, I would say there were probably better ways to handle that and accommodate everybody's interests.
Sure.
Which would be, okay, well, you know, we've closed the hearing for tonight and some of the critical parties have already left, but let's talk about reopening on a future date, right, when everybody can come,
That's good.
so, and
I'd
you
also
know,
just
yeah.
comment too, just on the timing, the 3 minutes thing. And I work in the water world, so we're always trying to develop water projects, and almost every one of our projects is challenged, whether it's approved or unapproved, it is always appealed. And we've sat through days of public comments, and I think almost always in the various city council stuff, they'll give people they'll just say like 30 seconds, like while they're talking, and then they cut the mic at that time. And it's probably good, if we end up in a situation with a lot of people, or even just a couple of people, it's probably good practice to start doing something like that.
I think probably so. And just to kind of sum up this issue, I think there have been some great comments. And the irony of due process is that it actually, in fact, elevates process over substance. And that may be why some of you are like, this doesn't sit well with me from the standpoint of, you know, citizen service, customer service. It doesn't sit well with my heart that this is the decision we have to make because the substance of what we're doing doesn't feel right. But the fact is, to comport with due process, you do almost have to elevate procedure over substance. And it feels weird and wrong to say that, but you know, it's due process.
I know this is a super basic, simple question, but
Yeah.
what's the definition of due process?
Yeah, so in the context of property rights, it is notice and the right to a fair hearing before an unbiased
Okay.
decision maker.
Great.
So notice, opportunity of hearing. I think pretty much all the things can be encompassed within that. Great question, thank you. So, you know, you guys don't wear robes, you don't wear black robes, and so, you know, you may not
Should
really.
Should. Come on, Ann.
I've been saying for years that Sursa ought to have, you know, branded Sursa black robes to hand out to any quasi judicial person, but that would be weird probably. But you know, you can kind of mentally put on that black robe right before a quasi judicial matter so that you can kind of get your mind right in terms of the rules of engagement. So thinking like a judge really is probably the key. And so I don't know if you guys can see the green, right? Those are kind of the basics of thinking like a judge, right? Don't make up your mind before the hearing, because that wouldn't be fair. Don't make prejudicial pre-hearing statements, right? You don't wanna let on that you might be biased on one side or another by making statements, right? Speaking with one side or the other before a hearing, even though you have no intention of saying, you know, I'm speaking to this one side because I favor that one side, right? What's the appearance? It's not gonna look right. And so that's another judge-like thing that you can do. Of course, if you have a financial or other personal interest in a matter, then you should not participate. Again, that goes to the due process, the fairness of the hearing. Signing pro or con petitions. So you probably don't have that in the kind of work that you do, but you know, the local licensing authority, right? Who is the local license? Is that the town board?
The clerk
Okay.
and the town trustees, yep.
Okay. Yeah, so at least in the metro area, this, practice of circulating pro and con petitions is a pretty common thing for liquor license applicants to do. And there were times when I would kind of peruse the list of pros and cons, and I would discover to my horror that a member of my city council had signed a pro or con petition, right? It just doesn't look right. And again, we can use the cleansing power of waiver to say, I didn't know what I was signing. I promise that I will only listen to the evidence tonight and I will make up my mind based upon that evidence. But, it just doesn't look right. It's a hurdle to have to overcome.
Can I ask you a specific question on that? The Association of Realtors for Berthoud and Loveland sent me a questionnaire because I'm running for a trustee position, and one of the questions they asked me are you in favor of metro districts? So if I were to go one way or the other, where would that fall on the example you just gave?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, it could be a risky question. It's, to me, it's not a directly risky question. It's not like they're asking, how do you feel about, a big box retailer, right? That would be a pretty direct question. That would affect any big box retailer who came to town. It could, in the sense that if your no vote were premised on, well, the way that you propose to provide, right, essential public services like water and sewer, really kind of doesn't sit well with me because I hate metro districts, as I said in my, questionnaire, right? Right, I can see where that could be, like, oh, well, you hate metro districts and so you were never gonna approve our application because, the only way it can move forward feasibly is with a metro district. So I would say, it could, but on the other hand, again, let's turn to the cleansing power of waiver, right? If somebody were to say, hey, Commissioner, I read your questionnaire answer and so I don't think you should be participating because my proposal does include the formation of a metro district, then you can cleanse the situation by saying, hey, that was a question in the abstract and I am here tonight to listen to your testimony, to review your application according to, right, the evidence and the applicable legal criteria, and so pay that questionnaire no mind.
And likewise, if you said, yes, I do like metro districts and I think they're great, a metro district comes forward and makes a presentation, however, they don't meet the town's
Right, yeah.
policy on metro district for some reason, and you vote against them, then that could make you look like,
Yep.
that's a toughie too.
I didn't think it was an appropriate question, to be perfectly honest, that's why I was asking.
Yeah.
It's kind of an overly broad question. It's
Yeah.
very abstract.
So it's kind of an I gotcha if they're leaning one way or the other, right?
Either way,
Yeah.
If if you answered wrong, you don't get our endorsement. If you answer the way we don't want you to answer, then you don't get my endorsement, so
Yeah.
it was.
Well, I have to admit, when I first interviewed for the Plan Commission, I was asked that question. And I did, for many years of working with legislatures and with politics, I danced on it. But, because I thought, no matter how I answer this question, somebody's not gonna like how I answer it.
Right.
I think someone asked me about metro districts in my interview too. Now that I'm thinking about it.
Interesting. And one way you can field those kinds of overly broad, gotcha type questions is to say, in the abstract, I really have nothing against them. I would need to see how the metro district is being deployed in any given situation
That's pretty
before I
much
would
what
have
I
an
said.
opinion.
Good,
That's how I
kind
answered.
of
Trying to
a good
avoid
dancing
answering.
answer.
Yeah, exactly.
And could you, just a sidebar just for a second, could we put on our agendas at some point, just to talk about the process for replacing members on this? I'm not clear.
We just put it out for an advertisement and then we interview.
Who's we?
2 members of the town board of trustees, the chairwoman and staff sits on just to listen.
Is that stated somewhere that that's town policy?
That's just how the town clerk runs it.
Thank you.
So as committed citizens and, longtime pillars of the community, do you guys know stuff about this community that others might not know?
Yes.
Is it possible that you might know stuff that would be pertinent to a particular application?
Yes.
What do you do with that knowledge that you have if it doesn't enter the record of the hearing?
You file it away and don't use it in your decision making.
Now, it might be that it's important information and you're just sitting there going, wish somebody would bring this issue up, right? There may be sort of pre-hearing opportunities to talk with staff about those kinds of issues, right? To have them fleshed out by staff. Or, if you feel like, oh my gosh, I can't let this go, one way in which you can kind of bring up the issue without actually becoming a witness yourself is to ask a question, right? So you might be able to frame your concern or what you know in terms of a question
Right.
and just let somebody else's mouth speak that information, right? So that's a way to handle that. But that's how a judge would do it. A judge would never be like, I know for a fact, he or she would rely on the witnesses.
Very interesting.
And so that brings me to the last, which is your job is decider. You're the decision maker. And so at the point at which you find yourselves being, sort of a witness, right? Your questions, you said, oh, well, Tammy said I could ask a question. And so you start cross-examining witnesses like you're a prosecutor, right? Then you're kind of suddenly outside the role of a judge, right? So you want to say, I'm a judge, I'm not a witness, I'm not a prosecutor, I am not an advocate, and make sure that your conduct, keeps you within those confines.
Do you have any guidelines or advice for when we go into our discussion up here in front of the public?
Yeah.
I commend the group because I think there's so much respect and people listen, everybody takes everybody's opinion into consideration, but do you have any guidance on that?
Yeah, I actually do. A little further down, if we can
Oh, I
just,
thought you, like, we're making your last point of the whole.
Okay, yeah, sorry, no, there's a few more conduct issues, and then we can talk about that deliberation process, so, yeah, I'm sorry about that. So, of course, you wanna make sure that you stay away from the pre-hearing buzz. Is there buzz about a potential development that starts happening long before the matter hits your agenda? Is it maybe in social media or the neighbors are, buttonholing you about it? Please, if you can, stay away from that buzz and don't contribute to it. Just be like, hey, I'm on the commission, so I'm sure that it'll come to me in due course, and I really, can't really talk about it until then.
So, and how about talking to each other before a commission?
Yeah,
What are the
same
rules?
thing, yeah, same thing. To me, that falls under the category of lobbying, or could end up being that way, right?
And a quorum is irrelevant, you shouldn't,
Yeah.
even one-on-one, you
Exactly.
shouldn't have discussions.
Yeah, exactly correct, yeah. When it's time to deliberate, then obviously you wanna have an exchange of views and listen to one another, but to do that beforehand, starts to look not fair, so.
Do the sunshine laws apply to planning commission?
Sure do, yes. So 3 or more or a quorum, whichever is less, right, is the magic number for when you need to say, there's 3 of us, we're talking about public business. Is this a public meeting that we've given proper public notice of? Oops, nope. So we better not discuss this,
So it was
right?
2, so it's 3.
It's 3 or more or a quorum, whichever is less. But there is, in these times, a further restriction, and it's not necessarily written in the open meetings law yet, but let's say that you're very mindful of the three, right, rule. And so you say, well, I'm just gonna talk to one, right? And then I'm gonna talk to one more. And then I'm gonna talk to one more, one
Independent.
at a time.
One at a time,
Yeah.
right?
Is that problematic? Yes, it is. Even if it's not, within the letter of an open meetings law violation, the courts are increasingly saying you're still violating the spirit, right? By doing these serial one-on-one meetings. So I would say the best course of action is just don't talk about it, right? Have your discussion during deliberations and
Are you
limit-
gonna get into conflict of interest at all in your presentation?
Yeah, a little bit. I guess I would invite questions in that regard because it is, specific to some extent to your own, conflict of interest provisions. But I would say if you have a financial interest or other personal interest, right, that your unbiasedness could be reasonably questioned. And so the best course of action, if you have, certainly a financial interest or the kind of personal interest that is, apart, separate and apart from sort of the rest of the citizenry, like this is about to happen in my backyard, right, then it
So
might be.
what do you do?
To disclose the interest and then recuse yourself from participating in the hearing or the
You
decision.
physically have to leave. the group.
Physically leave is the best policy.
We had a situation like that a couple months ago, and it was a land use issue that was before us that would have impacted a board, a nonprofit board that I sit on.
Oh.
And so I recused myself, and I know there was some discussion about that, but I felt that I probably couldn't have been very impartial about that because obviously I feel very strongly about this nonprofit.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And so you didn't even sit in the room while it was, good. Some people will say, well, it's my constitutional right to at least listen, right? And it's like, well, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Because I've definitely seen hearings where somebody technically recused themselves, but then sat in the back of the room and, made the frowny face or the happy face, depending on what they were hearing.
That's what I should have done.
And sometimes it isn't even about the conflict, it's about the appearance.
So, I don't think we need to talk too much more about ex parte contacts, but, if somebody tries to hit you up before the hearing, then your best course of action is to say, please, please, please come to the hearing and express your views because, it doesn't do any good for you to try to, just tell me. And if there are opportunities for them to submit letters for the record, then let them know about that too. Are there opportunities like that?
You bet. Yep.
Okay.
Yep,
Perfect.
they can call, just say, call staff.
Get in touch with staff.
And ex parte contacts are not just, a citizen buttonholing you before the hearing. Talking with each other can be an ex parte contact, right? Talking with the staff, depending upon, how you're utilizing the staff can start to look like, an ex parte contact of a sort. I mean, of course, you want to be able to use your staff as a resource if you have questions around things, but if you're trying to get them to advocate or to be an advocate for one side or another, then that starts to look like an improper way to utilize your staff.
So Tammy, I do have a question to clarify with you to help me. Before the week of the hearing, I will always talk to the chairperson and just let them know we have these things on the agenda. We've not heard from surrounding property owners. There are no conflicts from referral agencies because I am hoping to give her a heads up. Do we need to have timing and kind of just get prepared for a contentious hearing or not? And what I'm doing with that, is that a bad, am I, okay.
I think that's perfectly fine. It really, I would call that in the nature of housekeeping, right? For the chairperson to be able to prepare accordingly, so, yeah. So in these slides, I do give you sort of a a script you can use if you have a citizen trying to hit you up, you know, it's really, I can't talk with you, blame the attorney, but I can't talk with you, you know, come to the hearing please, or submit a letter into the record. A pretty common question is, well, at what point does this ex parte prohibition kick in, right? If an idea is just an idea, you don't even know if it's ever gonna turn into an application, right? Can you talk about it? Yeah, probably. But if you have a reasonable idea, right, that at some point this is gonna come before us, then I would say it's probably best to say, okay, you know, let's follow the rules of engagement. So deliberation and discussing of the evidence, obviously a very, very critical part, right? And you do wanna sort of pick the brains of one another because you're sort of a group, and to have the, you know, the combined mind power and experience of all of you is really a valuable asset to decision making. And so, you know, the formula is facts I learned at the hearing, the legal criteria applicable to the matter equals your decision, right? Sounds simple enough, but it's not always that simple. There are discretionary factors, for instance, in most of, you know, that box that you guys operate in. And so you wanna have discussion, especially around those discretionary matters. But of course, even the deliberation part, even if you've closed the testimony, that deliberation part is still part of the hearing and is still gonna be, you know, part of the transcript of the hearing that the judge will be reviewing. And so you do wanna be, you know, careful about discussing and deliberating upon the evidence, because the judge will say, well, yeah, they did it the way I would have done it had I been the judge in this, right? Or that sure looks irregular to me, you know, they were not acting as judges at that point. So, you know, deliberation though is the time to talk amongst yourselves, and it's the time for, I guess, you know, probing one another, especially on the discretionary factors and how you view them. Because, you know, most of your decisions are not black and white formula based, right? There are certainly gonna be discretionary factors, and each of you may have a different perspective around them. So, but you know, the time to ask questions at that point is over, right? If you've closed the testimony, then the time for questions really is over.
Except among ourselves.
Yeah, you can probe one another, but yeah.
So in other words, if as we're talking, we have a question, let's say for staff or the applicant, should we just not do that?
I think it might be important to say, well, we've got a question, and you know, maybe we can pose it to the attorney and see whether, you know, it's something within the purview of something that can be answered, or
Seems to be a regular occurrence, seems to happen very frequently where
Yeah.
when we're talking, we don't know the answer, and it, whether we're out of order or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it seems like we do end up then asking the applicant or whomever the question about it.
Yeah.
Are we pushing the envelope there?
I guess I saw that happen tonight,
Yeah, we did that.
yeah. But did you formally close the hearing? Or,
We closed the public hearing.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
But like a clarification question.
yeah.
Yeah, because you know, in a way, we receive the documents, okay, fine. We
Yeah.
cannot talk to each other,
Mhm.
we cannot talk to any other outside party, and and when the applicant is there, we can ask questions, so
Yeah.
our mission is a little bit difficult on that way.
Yeah, yeah, and this is maybe another place for the cleansing power of waiver, right? And I would work with your town attorney to say, is it okay if we just quickly ask this question, and she can look around the room and see if, you know, anybody would be hurt by that or not, right? And then you can move forward. Or I don't know, if it's a staff level question about procedure or the ordinance, you know, I don't have an issue with that. You could answer or the attorney could answer, so. But if it's a factual issue, which I did hear that tonight, right?
Yeah.
We did that.
Where he said, this is more of a canopy than a sign, right?
It's very probable that what we're discussing that point did not come up in that, I mean, like
Right.
very probable, and then we kind of go, oh,
Yeah.
what is happening with
Yeah.
that? So that, it's not like it's rare, that it seems to be a pretty normal thing.
And sometimes when we get into
Yeah.
discussion, all of a sudden we realize, oh, what about this?
Yes.
You know? And we wanna be able to ask that question so that
Yeah.
will help us better decide.
Right.
You know, I would say make sure you don't excuse any of the people who testified, right? You know, like, we're gonna close the testimony at this point, but we're going into deliberations, so please do hang around.
Well, they almost always hang around just to hear what our vote is,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So, you know, if that's the case, then I would say, you know, one of the essential components for a liability, which is an injury to someone, is not gonna happen, right? I think you're gonna be okay. So I just love the cleansing power of waiver, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's in the room and they're like, sure, go ahead and ask,
Okay.
right?
So I have to think about that, about asking that, particularly when we have more, like tonight, we had no audience, so it didn't
Yeah.
really make any difference, but
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, personal preferences, I think, can come into play, right, when you're trying to deliberate on a matter, but they really have to be set aside. Also, community preferences, certainly, you know, you're gonna know what the community preferences are, but they have to be set aside. Unless they're directly relevant, unless they're actually part of the box, and most likely they're not. I may have given you this example last year. It happened in one of the South Weld municipalities where I was city attorney, and extremely controversial land use development. This was in the 90s, before this community kind of developed a sense of self-esteem around itself. And so, by golly, they were preparing to become the regional landfill for South Weld County. Can you imagine how the citizens felt about that?
Sure.
Right? But it was a low self-esteem body, and they were like, if we don't approve this, we will never see anything happening in our city. And so we're gonna entertain this proposal. Well, of course, it was controversial among the members as well. And so one of the members sitting right next to me on the dais basically said, I'm voting no, and I'd like to explain why. I have heard the community sentiment because everybody in town has called me. I have been tallying the calls in favor and the calls against, and I haven't received any phone calls in favor of this, so I'm voting no.
No,
Was that within the legal criteria for
I don't
approval?
think so.
Right? No. Tallying, yay and nays among the citizenry was not one of the legal criteria. And yet, swayed by community sentiment and the need to explain why he was voting no, that's what he said. Thank goodness there was not a majority who said the same thing. A majority voted in favor, or we would have had a due process issue.
So is there any kind of fiduciary responsibility to represent your constituents, to represent the residents on what it is they want as we sit here? Or is that 100% out of scope?
Beautiful question. Yes, of course, that's your ultimate responsibility, but you have to do so within the parameters, right?
So the code.
Yes,
And that's that tough balance you're talking about.
And I would also add that in the development of the comprehensive plan, there was extensive public feedback and solicitation for input.
So, yeah, this thing got approved. You do not see a regional landfill in southern Weld County, however, because there were legal maneuvers that took place afterwards. And in this case, it wasn't a Rule 106, it was an initiative and referendum process, which then hung the judge up for, I kid you not, it must have been 10 years. We would periodically write a letter to the judge. You gonna be issuing a decision anytime soon? But on the other hand, we didn't really care, cause right, as in my heart, right, as, you know, somebody who could have lived there, right, I was like, I don't want it either, but, but,
I worked for Waste Management.
oh, did you? Okay, then you know exactly what
I
I'm
was the
talking about.
landfill vice president, yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Been
and then
through a
it
few of
turned
those.
into, well, it's not gonna be a landfill, it's gonna be a,
Transfer station.
yeah, and then it turned into, it'll be one of those places that,
Sorting center,
no, it's even uglier, you know, like,
hauling company.
you know, like used bandages and stuff, they were gonna
Like medical.
steam them.
Oh,
I can't remember what the
yeah.
I think,
technical name
I
is,
think
but
Erie's landfill looks like a mountain.
was it?
You can mountain bike them from there.
Anyway.
Like the one in Commerce City looks like that.
Repurpose it.
Memories,
Rough days back
right?
then, trust me.
Yeah, definitely memories. So anyway, so when doing deliberations, you wanna make sure that all of your deliberations are within that box, right? And you guys obviously know how to do that. It was really beautiful to see you guys kinda, you know, helping each other stay within that box. It was beautiful. Personal preferences need to stay out of, you know, the consideration. And also, you know, if you can't tie up the public interest to one of the criteria, right, then it shouldn't be discussed. I think that most of the time with a well-written land use code like yours, that there's ample room within that box to be able to bring in your public interest, public concern type issues, but you just have to tie them into some part of the code.
So for example, let's say we have the public coming to talk about public health issues about a particular land use application, and our code is silent on public health implications. It can be stated, well, you know, I'm having a hard time because tonight we heard a lot of testimony about the public health implications of X. In our code and our criteria for approval, we list no reason to deny an application because of this issue. Therefore, we've heard you, citizenry, however, there's nothing that we can do to deny something based on that. Now, it could be on traffic or something that is in the code. So I think acknowledging that you've heard them, but then maybe saying why you can't do something. Does that like think, oh my gosh, shut up, Anne?
No.
So and who takes the lead on that? Would you see it?
You all can.
Cause we have like a criteria sheet here.
Beautiful.
You know, that you all give us with,
Right.
for these land
Right.
use issues, and it's trying to tie then the point to this, to one of these criteria.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, just scan those criteria and say, can I fit this citizen concern into one or more of these? So let's see, this slide, deliberations matter, use the rule of why, right? You know, it may be that some of you will start the discussion by saying, yeah, I'm voting no, right? And if that's the case, right, then the rest of the commissioners are not getting the benefit of your brain and the benefit of your thinking. And so I think then it's up to other members to kind of start, you know, asking to delve a little bit deeper and say, you know, what is the basis of your, you know, your concern about this proposal? You know, could you kind of point me to the criteria that are of particular concern to you? And just kind of start probing each other, but again, you know, staying within that box. And then pretty soon you will have the benefit of one another's thinking around it, and everybody will be able to hear that as well. You know, it used to be that I was so terrified of deliberations and explaining the vote that I highly discouraged it. I would shrink in my chair when somebody would say, I'd like to explain my vote, because I was mindful of that council member, right, who had tallied up the, you know, the citizen sentiment. But I do think deliberations are important. It's like, why else would we have
That's great.
7 minds on the body? And so, as long as you hew closely to the box and to the evidence that you hear, I have become increasingly comfortable and really do support the need for having deliberations amongst the group. We talked already about don't reopen the hearing for a latecomer and ways in which you can potentially get around that with the cleansing power of waiver or just, getting permission somehow to do this in a fashion where nobody can be upset about it. But do be cautious about commenting on the evidence or explaining the vote other than kind of tying up what you heard at the hearing to, the applicable legal criteria. So you've got a script, that's beautiful. You also have a criteria worksheet, is that right?
Yeah.
Yep, that is beautiful. I love that so much. I had a Board of Adjustment who was perpetually making wrong or just unexplainable decisions. And of course, they were, right, nobody could appeal these things, right, if the applicant was happy. But the council would look at these and be like, what are these people thinking here, right? And then, so I finally went in and looked at the code and realized that in order to make a valid decision, they actually had to check off the applicability of 18 different criteria, right, for a variance. Did they know this as the Board of Adjustment? No, they had no idea. They were really just kind of doing their best, the best that they could, but they had no idea what the criteria were. So, it's like, whose fault was that? It wasn't their fault. You have a criteria sheet, and so you've got really the map to be able to do that.
Thanks to the team over there.
Observing formalities, I think you're doing a good job of that appropriately with sort of the magnitude of, what the room is looking like. And also, the room, I think, is set up well to lend itself to formalities. So you don't have the potential for people just kind of, screaming from the back of the room. They have to come up, they have to have signed in, they have to come up and be recognized. So I do think you've got, all of the conditions in place for just a perfect, 100% perfect hearing. So back and forth, is okay during deliberations, but I would say be cautious about doing that during the testimony period. And always ask to be recognized by the chair before speaking or asking a question until deliberations. So again, setting a good example for everybody else in the room. So, your most important job is really to provide great process, right? And so, following these rules, I think, will enable you to always provide the great process that you need to provide in order for your decisions to be bulletproof and defensible. So I'm gonna stop there, see if there are any other questions. And if not, I really, really do thank you for your service. You are really one of the best planning commissions I have ever had the pleasure to speak with, and so keep up the great work.
Thanks for coming
Thank
out.
you, yes.
and taking your
It
time.
was-
Yeah,
it was,
that was very good.
Yeah,
Really
very
helpful
helpful.
to us.
Yeah.
And this is, the things you talked about, for me, they're not intuitive.
Right.
Like,
No.
these are very specific things, and to me, I always said to people that would go to a conference or something, if you take one thing and you come back from your conference and you put it into action, you're like, then it was worth it. And I pulled many things from tonight that I will change actually the way I do things going forward. So thank you so much.
Yeah, that's great, that's wonderful, thank you so much.
I have a question. Then, after listening to Tammy, what things can we change in how we do things? What are some things we need to make, maybe a list of things, or what can we do to make sure we have this great process?
Here's a perception, it could be a personal thing, so bring me back if
That's a waiver to.
yeah, I have a cleansing power waiver on that. Sometimes we seem to get bogged down on something that may not, and I'm more guilty than the majority. And we will spend an exorbitant amount of time talking about something that seems to have a very little impact and we just stay with it. And I just wonder, do we empower the group to, I'm making this up, throw a red flag? Or there's some secret word we use that says, we've been on this a long time.
I can do a better job of saying, let's go back to the criteria.
Focus on the criteria.
Does
And I
this
think
relate
that's
to that
good.
criteria?
Yeah.
And so then as you all are bringing things up during that time, also make sure that you look at that first and
No, I
say,
think that's good.
does this meet, is this relevant to that criteria?
An example last time, right, was like,
Yeah.
we're really here to talk about the things in this dotted line, but man, again, I was totally guilty, but then we went stuff all out and around that, so then I got a little confused because we just said we're just approving the lots, but now we're talking about speed bumps, we're talking about ADA, I think there's an opportunity, not just that we sometimes, again, I'd like to hear other people's opinion if you think that's accurate or
Right.
not.
I think that last week, we were all in the same trap. Because the way the presentation was done with the video, it's gonna be like this and like that, and then the drawing with the parking lots so we all thought that we were making the decision on that. And in fact, we weren't. And I think that Anne came back to us and said, hey, guys, this is what we need to decide
Right.
today. And you did a great job for that as well. So we all went in the same, so it's lesson learned, because next time we're gonna be more focused on what's on the paper. And thanks to the team, we have very good sheets explaining, okay, why is it good? Does it respect that rule? Yes, and there's a comment beside, so it's extremely well done. So we need to focus to stick on what's on the agenda and the applicant is coming for.
And we have a
So-
lot of new players on
Yeah.
the team, and
Yes,
so
yeah.
they have questions, me
I
too,
had
still.
tons of questions.
Process protocol, and so I just, it
Yeah,
seems
and-
like that's an area we probably could, as a group, improve a little bit.
And I think that, yeah, you do a really good job of asking, okay, is this pertinent to our decision-making power? And I think that's something that all of us should feel empowered to do, because sometimes the answer is no, but for some of the questions, the answer was yes, like the ADA ramp was pertinent to what we were discussing and the traffic was pertinent, and so, we have limited abilities to impact the approval, but it's important to consider the aspects of the application that are pertinent and to distinguish what is from what isn't. So I think that that's a fair point.
And I do think though, if we get questions from the audience that would be, that we can kind of fit into these criteria, and I kind of thought we could last time on many of them.
Well, yeah,
I think
it was,
we need
yeah,
to
a
try
mix.
to answer some of those for them, if we can.
And quite frankly, if I may jump in here, some of the discussion, just like when you're making a decision, sometimes it's really messy.
That's true.
And that's okay. That's okay because you're coming in unbiased. You're listening to the testimony of the public, you're listening to the applicant. You're trying to discern, okay, from this presentation, what is really applicable to what we're talking about tonight? And you're discussing that, and some of that discussion also helps the audience because the audience could also be confused. And so some of that is like Socratic questioning, and you're asking questions, you might know what the answer is, but you're asking questions to clarify so that you're really telling the audience.
Exactly.
And it's, some of it is, it's tough, and last time it was tough, but it wasn't anything that you did, it was the way something was presented to you.
Yeah, and I'm not blaming anyone, but I'm just saying that with the fact that we cannot talk together, yes, we can talk to the staff, and probably in the future I will do that more and ask for, can I come for half an hour or 20 minutes to discuss this and that? I don't know if it's possible, but it should. Because otherwise we are here with the partial information, we cannot discuss together, we have received the documents, but sometimes it's, even if I read them, believe me, not all the numbers, to be honest, but no, I try to do the job because it's, you do it or you don't do it, so. But then the difficulty is, okay, but I didn't get it, and I mean, sometimes you try to ask question to the person beside you, but it's not enough, and that's what happened. I mean, it was a good case last week, because it yeah, so we went all together in the trap, and in fact, so.
And just remember, if you ask questions, like if you lean over, hey Brett, what about this? You have to wait, okay, stop,
Right.
no sidebar conversations, I'm
Has to be
gonna
on the
wait and
record
ask.
too, yeah.
Must be on the record.
But I, you know, one of the things you said that was a little powerful for me was, you know, if somebody says no, you know, before it was just, okay, that's your prerogative, your no, but to be able to ask, hey, you know, tell me where you're coming from on that, you know, help me understand it. That's something I'm not sure we've done a lot of in the past, and I think there's a lot of value in that. And to your point, Ann, for the audience to hear that, I think that can really give them a good feeling too. Hey, these folks are really, you know, they're really looking into this.
And staff presents what we believe the criteria for approval, how they have been met. We're not advocating for the applicant, we're advocating for the town and the code. If you feel as if you have a question about something, ask that question, because you don't have to go with staff's recommendation.
Well, and I think too, when we read through those criterias and the answers, sometimes it's an interpretation if someone's met the criteria.
Yeah.
So that's really important that, you know, they may have checked off the box that, yes, we've met this criteria because we did this, but when you really dig into it, maybe they didn't, or they didn't really meet the entire concept of what that criteria was.
And oftentimes that's why you're gonna get some cases that are gonna have a lot of development standards
Yeah,
and a lot of conditions of approval.
yeah.
Right, you know, and you made a good point that you do go through with us what the criteria is. You know, we have it printed and then you mention it when one of you comes up to present, you know, as staff. Does it make sense for us at that point to stop and once you've done that and say, okay, so our parameters are what we are to look at this evening on this particular land use issue?
Yeah.
Does it meet this criteria, and our latitude is, for example, when we can add maybe you can add conditions, this is not the type of thing, I know with a variance we weren't gonna be able to add conditions to that one, but I mean, sometimes it just makes sense to hear what that is, what is our latitude in this
What
decision?
have you seen in all the communities that you've worked in? Who has done something like that really well?
I guess my municipal attorney experience isn't recent enough to be able to point to any recent examples, but you know, I've seen instances where the staff person is literally the last person to testify, right? Actually giving testimony as a witness. And that, I think, is a good opportunity to be able to direct clarifying questions while your hearing is still open.
So in other words, the applicant would go first,
Yeah,
then public hearing, and then
staff sums up with, you know, here's our memo and here's our
Don't we do
recommendation.
this? Or do we reverse
We do
it
a
first?
different order. We start with staff.
Yeah.
Start with staff.
Yeah, okay.
Staff, we set the record.
Uh-huh.
This is what's being requested, this is where it is, these are the criteria for approval. But we could always have then the applicant come up, public testimony, you close public testimony. You can always ask staff, hey, can you show us that slide again that lists our criteria?
I love
And
the
you
way
can
you
walk
guys,
through
you
that.
guys
Yeah, I
set
think
the
you
tone,
do.
you lay it
Yeah,
out
yeah.
there. Then it's, for me, then it's all clear.
Right.
And then the other guys, they're just coming up and then supporting their position.
But maybe it needs to be both.
But
Maybe you
Yeah.
need to start with describing the project and what, you know, the approvals and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then once the public hearing is, you do the applicant, the public hearing, and then staff comes back up and says, okay. And
any other
again,
question?
here's the criteria. Again, here's what your parameters are. Are there any other questions that we have as staff after hearing all of that?
What, and I'm thinking out loud, and I'm happy to consider anything. What if coming into the hearing, staff has the agenda report and our resolution one way, and what if something is unveiled during a public hearing. I was at a public hearing once and the gravel mining operator, I was staff at a county level. The gravel mining operator said, well, we don't have our augmentation water yet. It's like, oh, wait a minute, your application materials said that you did. Now that you're in a public format, you're now admitting that you don't have your augmentation. So it actually completely reversed staff's position in that hearing, and then we have a packet that's not based on. So how would staff handle that situation if we didn't present, here are our initial findings, and because we write our staff report based on referral agencies and surrounding property owner testimony that comes in before the hearing and our review of the code and the criteria. What if something changed during the hearing, we're not able to rewrite our staff report? I'm just trying to figure that out.
Would you do like a closing statement then?
Well, I would
No.
say maybe even not that. I would say if, right, some of the pillars underpinning, right, the whole hearing are not there, then, and you just discover that during the hearing, then it might be appropriate to say, again, with the cleansing power of waiver and everybody's okay, right, to say, hey, you know, there's a fundamental issue here that we may need to look into further. And so, you know, all of the, if I were you, I would confer with, right, certainly the applicant to get the okay in advance and have them then represent it on the record to say, hey, we would like to have a, 7-day recess of this hearing.
Continuance. And that's exactly what happened then. And tonight, with the gentleman, I went back to him and I said, all right, this is your choice. If you think they're going to be voting against you, you have the opportunity to amend your sign on the spot to satisfy the Board of Adjustment. So you need to be listening. If you think it's gonna go downhill, that's your job to come up and say, I'd like to put this on hold.
Well, I
Or
kinda-
I'd like to offer something up.
I asked that question, does this have to be a yes or no, or can we say, in 27, you gotta go to 20? But it sounded like, no, that's not an
So we
option.
Yes or no?
We,
They-
yeah,
they
we
could
could,
amend
but
it.
he
No, but
could,
who-
yeah.
But who could?
He could, the
So-
applicant.
so-
He could like
So
ask
can we
for a
make that
continuance,
whatever
yeah.
recommendation to him, hey, you can change your criteria, your ask
I
on the
mean,
spot?
he could. If all of you decided this is, this just isn't gonna work, are you willing to change?
Right.
Okay,
But you don't dictate to him how he has to change, you ask, are you willing to
Okay.
change to accommodate our concerns?
That's not what I heard it was just
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
shut,
no,
you're
yeah,
done,
good.
we can't talk about it anymore.
but it's good that we have this
Sounds like you're
discussion, yeah.
opening it up a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah, so, but the vote is deny or approve.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
We couldn't have put like a condition on that,
Right.
okay?
Right.
But then it's not the right way because if we say no, then he needs to come again with okay.
Yeah, or
Because-
if you would have said no, it's like, okay, buddy, you get 6 feet.
But somebody can,
Mike,
wrong
could it-
word, somebody can coach him to say, you can amend that, right? So I mean, somebody can tell him, you can come back with a smaller sign, like right now,
Right, yeah, during the same discussion. We cannot do that.
or can we?
I mean, you can suggest that,
Okay.
but he needed to be the one to agree to doing it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because he could have said, I'm gonna take my chances and gamble on this because my alternative is 6 feet.
Sure.
But I guess when we approved that final plat last week, we approved it with some sideboards and conditions, so why couldn't we approve a sign variance without some conditions? What's the difference?
I honestly don't know, and I don't know if it's because of, it's a variance because you're deviating from the code, but maybe.
It's a specific deviation that you're approving or not approving.
Okay.
And conditions probably are written out as something you can append in the land use code, right? Whereas your variance ordinance probably doesn't say you can approve a variance with conditions.
We've never, on all, in the three plan, well, these are the two plan commissions where this I was on, we couldn't because we also, I was also on our Board of Zoning Appeals in Fishers. And we couldn't, with a variance, we could not put conditions on it,
Right.
you know, so I was just assuming we couldn't hear either.
Because a variance is, and we can do variances for specifications in the sign code, design standards and zoning. Those are the only things we can have a variance from. And it's a very specific item. So it's not like you're really approving the land use. You're not saying, yes, you can have an ATM and you can have an ATM with these criteria. What you are saying is you can go from 6 feet to 27 feet. That was the variance, and there really isn't criteria that's associated with varying from what the allowance is.
That was kind of a unique sign too, so it's not like, I mean, I kinda understood where he was coming from. It's a marker almost,
Yeah.
and you have to be able to see the marker somehow, so.
It was a weird one.
Thanks.
Was,
Thank you
Thought you were
so
gonna hand
much.
out tissues or something,
You know
I thought
what?
this was gonna be real.
Oh, you're gonna make us cry.
Emotional.
I'm gonna try, I definitely was prepared. But yeah, this
This was great.
public officials handbook, you may already have copies
And thank
of,
you
but
for setting this up.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank
It's all Tammy.
It was a medical waste incinerator. That was the last
those are tough.
information.
I was a controller of hazards, that's fun,
Okay.
that burned PCBs, one of 3 in the country,
Yeah, oh my gosh.
so that was a tough hit.
Good thing that Nick's a calm and nice gentleman.
Yeah.
Being that he had to have that demeanor.
All right, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
so
Tammy.
much.
I enjoyed it.
And if you want a piece of pizza for your ride home, there's plenty in that. You know what? For some reason, our
Went around and I was like,
our restrooms are not, they're completely taped off, and that's what
Exactly, thank you.
We have to make a motion to close.
Oh,
Stick him in my
Madam
car.
Chair, do you wanna close the work session?
Yes, we need to.
I know,
Yeah.
a million.
I will take you after, if you can wait 5 minutes, I will take you
Second.
upstairs.
Alright, thank you.
Yes.
Motion.
We
and a
didn't have
second.
any reports.
second.
We do have reports if you want to hear them.
Well,
Oh.
do you wanna withdraw your motion?
They're very simple.
Yes.
They withdraw their motion for now.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. So on April 11th, we will have 3 land use items on the agenda. 2 are related. And they'll probably be presented together, but there will be 3 motions. On April 25th, that one is canceled. On May 9th, there will be 3 agenda items. 2 of those are related.
So did you say 25th was canceled?
Yeah, 25th is canceled. On May 9th, there will be 3 agenda items, 2 are related. And then 1 will be consolidating something in the code. So he can't get away from code writing. And then, so those are 3 on the 11th, 2 of them are related. 3 on May 9th, 2 are related, and 1 code issue.
Ramping
On,
up here.
yeah, on May 23rd, there's nothing yet, but we also have about 20 land use cases in process and something could be ready. We just don't know that far out yet.
Does that 20 include the 3 and the 2 on the 11th and on the 9th?
Yeah, 3 on the 11th, 3 on the 9th, on the 25th it's canceled.
Right, what I'm saying is we have 3 land use issues on the 11th, basically 2 land use issues
Yes.
on the 9th, that's 5, so is that included in the 20? Or do we have those 5 plus 20?
No, oh yeah, 20, there are, then that would leave about 14 or 15 in the pipeline.
And I always refer to my hard copy, but I lost it. And I went on to the e-note and it wouldn't let me on. So I don't know if anyone else has had any issues with that or.
The link, the
Yeah.
hyperlink,
Yeah,
Huh,
So again, just
Did-
FYI.
has anybody ever
With
done
the
the link?
agenda today.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was working for me.
Okay,
Yeah, the E code.
the e-notebook?
E-notebook, yes,
That's
that
what I'm
didn't
talking-
initially work, but
that's
then
what
you
I'm
fixed
talking
it and
about.
it
Yeah.
started all working.
Yep.
okay.
Yeah.
I had a link from an old email, I clicked on that and it said.
Yep, and
no
you
ad.
can always get to the planning commission
Yeah.
through the town website too, you just, it's not a quick poke and you're
Got it.
there.
Thank you.
And I won't be here on the 11th, but I'll be calling you.
So,
Okay.
you try this.
So you'll be on Zoom, you'll be our Zoom people?
I'll be a Zoom person.
Okay, we're zooming you.
Zoom it in.
Normally I can just read my hard copy.
Alright, so any other announcements, reports, anyone else have a report?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Well, with a motion and a second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned.
Iris.
Well, didn't understand
Can
what
we
we
do
just